What things did you do as a teenager that you thought you covered up well, but now as an adult, you realize your parents weren't freaking stupid? In back-to-back sentences I asked my dad if he monitored our internet history, and if paying for things online showed up on his credit card statement. Just harmless, unrelated questions. I remember being in 3rd grade and discovering I could erase math problems from my math book. The book came like that, with those massive empty spaces between the problems. God, I was an idiot. Typed to knackedwoman.com into the family computer search browser when I was like 9. Brother and dad entered room and I exited the page thinking that was it. Dad pulled up history and found it, told them I meant to type in nuclear weapons since I was into guns and stuff. They said okay and I thought they bought it. Can't believe I was this freaking stupid. Dang autocorrect. Well, for me, my parents left every weekend from Friday, late Sunday to spend time on their property they bought out in the country. Every weekend. From the time I was 13 plus. So, naturally, my house became the party house for me and my friends. My parents would tell me, no one can come over during this time. So, my girlfriend would come over and stay the night. We'd have parties of 20 plus people in my quiet suburban house. Probably had the cops called around 5-8 times. I knew the main patroller's name, and he knew my name house. Every Sunday, I would clean, like a madman, the entirety of the house. I would mop, I would vacuum, I would dust, I would take out the trash. I would dump hundreds of bottles of beer alcohol in a public dumpster about 15 minutes away. I would comb the yard for torn pieces of beer labels, bottle caps, etc. If someone vomited, I'd get shout and clean that sucker out. Only twice did I think I was caught. Once when my dad found a mixer with a preloaded Cosmopolitan under the sink which apparently some drunk girl had hid there. And then again, when I had mistakenly placed the table decoration in a completely wrong way on the table runner. The first, I claimed ignorance and said it must have been the house cleaner who comes every other Friday. And the second I fessed up and said me and the boys had played some poker on the long table while they were gone. No repercussions. Fast forward 4 years, I'm graduating college, talking with my parents, and I made mention that I used to have some parties while they were gone, occasionally, to which they laughed. Yeah, we knew you had parties. We got called probably 5+ times by the police, and about 40+ times from the freaking Jones neighbors, complaining about your parties. Plus, Bollerod a few. Every Sunday we came back the house was cleaner than when we left it. Or they. That's probably why they never told you they knew. If you knew, you wouldn't have cleaned so well afterwards. When I was in high school I would smoke weed in my room and do the old towel under the door trick. Of course my parents would call me out on it being there and would make comments, but I was pretty sure I had them tricked with the incense I was burning. Then one day I must have pushed it too far by taking gravity bong rips with my buddy. I hear a stern knocking on the door and an open up chemical burn. We need to talk. My friend and I in our incredibly stoned state are going ogadogged, and in my genius I stammered out, I can't, we're naked. This is followed by an "oh we came" downstairs awkwardly 30 minutes later, and my dad and I never spoke of that moment again. TLDR. Dad knows I smoke pot in bedroom with friend. I turn the tables and make it more awkward for my dad to talk about it than is worth his while. My family's house was 3 stories. The top floor being one big room that spanned the length of the house. Me and my girlfriend at the time would have mad monkey sex all day every day. It was right after HS, we were both unemployed. We would try to be prepared if someone were to come up as in a blanket to throw over us, etc. One day I was downstairs while she was on the 3rd floor and it sounded like the fricking roof was caving in. I went back upstairs and asked her if she had been jumping around or something, and she said she had just been walking around. I realized then that my parents had definitely heard us fricking every single goddamn time. They never said a word or came upstairs. That reminds me of a good friend who told me that she got rug burn on her back from having intense sex in her room, which was right above her parents. Her parents wouldn't have mentioned anything if the burn weren't sticking out from under her midriff top. They used it as an opener to say something like, "Honey, we hope he didn't hurt you." It sounded rougher than usual last night. When I was the tender age of 14, a rather aggressive girl took to me and she would sneak over, sometimes without informing me she was coming over. When my parents were away, one day we decided to go up to my tree house where I used to read when I was younger. My dad came home early from work, the one friggin' time in his life he ever did that, so we panic. My tree house was situated right over an alley with a good 12-foot drop over the fence into said alley. So she decides to jump out of the tree into the alley, forgetting her shoes in the process. I hadn't been in that tree house for years, so I knew my dad would be suspicious if I just strolled out. There under the blanket was an old copy of The Hobbit, so I grabbed it and went in. Instead of just walking to my room like I should have, I decided to have long engrossing conversation him about the plot of The Hobbit, you know, to convince him that's why I was up there. Only thing is, I never read The Hobbit, but I knew my dad hadn't either, so I came up with the plot for The Hobbit right on the spot. It was no Tolkien, but I think my plot was pretty dang good. Come to find out years later in passing conversation with my mom that my dad in fact loved The Hobbit. He had seen the girl jump out of the tree house and listened to my fake retelling of The Hobbit because he was too bad but to care that I had a girl over. TLDR. Came up with a fake plot for The Hobbit to convince my dad I wasn't with a girl in my tree house. Speaking as a father, hearing your son make up an entire plot for a book you know well would be worth the entertainment value. I had a huge house party when my parents were gone. I moved all the breakables into bedrooms and locked them so nothing was broken stolen. I took before photos so I'd remember how to arrange everything afterwards. When they returned, my mom was all a few things seem off in here. That is, statues in a cabinet. In the moment I thought I outwitted them. They definitely knew. I'm honestly shocked how much they didn't know. I tell my mother stories now and she's horrified that she had no idea what I was up to. I was a terrible teenager, or maybe a great teenager depending on how you look at it. Ditto. Then again, back then my mom was a promiscuous alcoholic, so it doesn't really mean I was very clever. Entered breasts, nudity, nudism and various other searches in Microsoft Encarta for a school project. I remember nudism because that's the page that I left on the screen when my mom came into the room. BTW, there's no good titty pics on Encarta. I was brewing prison hooch. I innocently asked my mom, a biologist, how alcohol is made, and she explained in full detail the process of fermentation. I then asked if we had mason jars, then baking yeast. Then I started squeezing gallons of fresh orange juice. I drank a 6-pack of beer one time and put the caps back on. Told them the beer had evaporated. I would sneak outside for a cigarette, put perfume on and was convinced they couldn't smell it. I would come home stoned out of my mind and tell them my eyes were red because of allergies. Middle of winter in Canada. Not much to be allergic to. Jizzing in on my socks, then putting them in my dirty clothes basket. Forgetting who washes my clothes. Having 3 boys, I think my mom's probably seen her fair share of CM covered socks and underpants, and for that reason alone we as a family are more lenient when she talks during the football. My mom made me start doing my own laundry when I was 13 and I just realized why. Sorry, mom. I'm with you OP. Every night I would excuse myself from dinner early so I could masturbate and I would announce to everyone, yeah, I'm really tired, so I'm just gonna hit the hay. Don't disturb me. Worst thing was sneaking out to get some tissues. Just got a bit of a runny nose. I smoked a lot of pot all throughout high school. I would come home with fire truck red eyes and eat half the food in the kitchen. But my parents never confronted me about it, so I thought I was so slick. About a year ago, I'm 24 now, I figured it had been long enough to let them in on my little secret. They just laughed and basically said, yeah, we knew. But you kept your grades up so we let it go. I smoked a lot of pot growing up too. I noticed a pattern where my mom would say I smell like pot and I would react defensively and she would know. Inversely, one day she accused me of smelling like pot, to which I replied calmly, maybe because I just crap my pants. That managed to perfectly defuse the situation. I was stoned at the computer eating some Starbursts. My mom walks in, says hi and asks what I'm eating. Look down at the candy very confused. Okay, it's strawberry flavored. It's called Star. I'm eating starberries. My mom stares at me. Ooh, okay, nailed it. I was not a good student in Hebrew school. When you did bad on a test, you had to get your parents to sign off on your exam. Well, I saw something on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air that I thought might work. Basically, Will needed a signature on something and told his uncle that he could analyze his signature if he liked. So he got people to write their signatures on one piece of paper, and then when it was his uncle's turn, he lifted up the top sheet and made him write it on the bottom sheet, which was his test that he needed signed. It worked on the show, so I figured why not try it in real life, and guess what? It worked. I love that you took tips from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That alone is glorious. That's the reason why I masturbated with my doors wide open, for everyone to see. Trust me, no one wants to walk into you masturbating. I left a note on the door to my basement saying my parents couldn't come down for 6 hours because me and my friend were doing a science experiment. We were tripping for the first time. Now that I think of it, my parents could have only guessed we were experimenting with drugs, or experimenting with being lesbians. I never spoke to my parents about it. When I first realized you could find pictures of naked ladies on the internet, I asked my mom how to spell naked. I was sitting at the computer. My dad grew tired with me spending so much time on the computer, and so he bought a program called Kids Watch or something like that. Its purpose was to make it so I could only access my machine at certain times of the day with a monthly time limit. So I used to just screw with the BIOS when I ran out of time. And he caught on eventually and passworded it. I thought I was pretty sneaky when I popped the CMOS battery out of my motherboard to reset the password, and continued to mess with the date settings to circumvent the child locks, but he probably knew. Mine isn't very exciting. My mother would prepare all these carefully arranged party trays of food for Christmas or Thanksgiving. I would eat as many of the delicious things as possible at it, and carefully arrange everything else a little further apart to cover my tracks. I would steal liquor from my parents' cabinet in high school. They didn't drink, so it must have been fairly obvious to them when the bottles they'd get as gifts would work their way down from almost full to almost empty. I also had a bad habit of drunk dialing them when I went to college for the first month or so. They never said anything about that either. The only time I actually got a lecture was when I was downloading PR0N on the family computer. It was the mid-90s, and the .jpg files have grown to take up a full 1/3 of the computer's paltry hard disk before my father started looking for what was eating up the valuable space. Lesson learned, I stored them on zip disk instead. Next time you talk to your parents, I dare you to ask them this question. What did you do that you thought you had covered up well, but they actually noticed? And of course, report back here with stories. I would do this, but I know that one of them would be about jerking it, and I couldn't take that. I would sleep over at my ex's all the time, which my father would have flipped his crap if he knew. So he would ask me, the mornings after, what time I had gotten home at the night before. I would lie and say some outrageous time like 2 AM because I knew he was asleep then. He would say okay and the topic would be over. I later came to realize my dad woke up before me for work, so he would see my car wasn't in the driveway in the AM, obviously making it clear I didn't come home. I imagined the look on your dad's face, and it broke my heart. Dated other guys. I'm going to go hang out with Amanda. I actually had a friend named Amanda. My parents told me they had a joke to it. Yeah, a man. Duh. Not me, really, but my brother, who I watched go through teenagerdom while I was an adult. He'd do things like walk in the house with a lump of chew under his lip and talk to us like it wasn't there, and deny that it was when we called him out. He either thought he was incredibly slick or that we were completely stupid. He thought that since we wouldn't hear it in his mouth when he spoke, that meant we wouldn't notice it sticking out under his lip. He's 20 now, and lies constantly, but is horrible at it. I just don't understand why he bothers anyway. Most habitual liars are both really bad at it and delusional about how good they are at it, no matter how many times they get called out. My uncle is exactly this way. What you doing? I'm Doc. Quickly minimize P-site on IE6. Nothing dad. Just reading up in Carter for my history project. You gotta see this speech they have. So cool. Okay. Don't waste much time though, son. Looking back, I'm sure glad my dad didn't corner me about P even though he clearly knew. Encarta, wow, I had forgotten about that. I skipped school in high school so much. I was making up hours after school to graduate. I thought I was being so sneaky. When I graduated high school, Dad asked me, "So, where did you go when you were cutting class?" My parents had known all along but never told me. When I was still teaching college, I would be so amused by the excuses. One time, one of the excuses was overheard, and students and I started chatting informally about brown nosing, BS, and such. The students were so confident that none of their profs knew what they were up to, until I reminded them that most of those profs had 6-10 years experience as college students, given the requirements for graduate studies. The expressions on their faces were amusing. I said something like, "Yeah, we know what you're doing. We all did it too. For years. When we let it slide, that's not because you fooled us, but because we decided to let it slide." I was smiling, obviously not condemning them. Excuses for the rest of the semester were way less stale, and usually had more to do with concerts gone to, wild parties, and crazy roommates, not yet another grandparent or pet dying. Parents get technically savvy uncle to set up parental controls and schedule for PC time so I could only use it for 1 hour a day and could only access Google, Wikipedia, and a few other websites. Bootable Linux was the most handy thing in the world, and thus all my programming knowledge now comes from my insatiable need to jack off. When I was young I would beat it in bed, toes pointed straight out, holding breathe like an amateur. I'd splodge into the tiny gap beside bed and wall. Years later when I moved out and we pulled the bed away there was so much man sauce caked on the wall and yellow I nearly fainted. My mom said you must have vomited one day coming home drunk and forgot about it. Yes mom, that's exactly what happened. Poker face. That's freaking nasty. When I was in high school, I had a couple of bottles of pucker in my bedroom closet. Yeah, we used to put it in Sonic slushes. I went to college and kind of forgot about the bottles. My room was in the basement, and we had some minor flooding, so my dad moved everything that was touching the floor, including the contents of my closet, into a pile on my bed. When I came back from college to go through the stuff, the bottles were gone. My dad apparently had discreetly disposed of them for me without telling my mom. Cool dad. Mine did this with my bubbler I left at home. He pulled me aside and mentioned that he found it, and that he wouldn't tell mom as long as I didn't get caught and wasn't an idiot. He then went on to mention that he'd often climbed onto the roof of his childhood home to get high. I love that man. I used to think that aerosol deodorant masked the sweet smell of weed. Then, much later, I realized that my parents were in fact rather liberal. Ho hum. I played travel hockey when I was in high school and my girlfriend was coming with me to a game a couple hours away when I was 15 or 16. My dad was driving in the front seat and we were sitting in the back with a blanket covering us. She gets cold easily, so it seemed legitimate. So, for some reason, we decided it'd be a great idea to start teasing each other under the blanket and she starts to get me excited. This continues into a full-on hand job. Of course, we thought we're being stealthy and it seemed like the slowest hand job in this history of the earth with the blanket not moving at all. Of course looking back on it, he probably took one look in the rear view mirror, saw my face, and decided this was something that would just be better not brought up. TLDR. GF in high school gave me a HJ under a blanket in the backseat of a car while my dad drove me to a hockey game. He knew. I stole a cassette tape from another student. I thought the teacher saw me, but she never commented. Found out later that the teachers often felt bad for us, cause we're a lower income family. I still feel guilty to this day about stealing that tape and still haunts me to this day. The worst part was the cassette was Vanilla Ice. Whited out my grades on a report card and retyped in better grades. Told my dad the school made a mistake. My dad let it slide. Years later I found out that my dad tried the same thing when he was young and his dad came down hard on him. I was about 13 years old, sitting in the living room one day. I was on the couch minding my own business when I got extremely frisky. Between the living room and my room was the dining room where my dad was sitting at the table eating. I took a deep breath and went into stealth mode. I was rock hard, wearing gym shorts by the way. I got up, grabbed a tissue box, and headed to the dining room. I walked in the dining room holding a tissue box casually over my crotch area. I didn't acknowledge the dad, but crept to the right towards my room. I realized I had no hope shuffling sideways with a tissue box over my crotch, so I attempted to turn while covering my boner. I swiftly turned right but totally fumbled the tissue box maneuver. I'm sure he caught a glimpse of my boner profile. Still beat off. Bonus. When I was younger I went to a private school. Every week we would have chapel. We'd all go to a big church building. The boys wore dress pants and button-ups. Girls wore skirts. Week after week I would get boners during chapel. Not a problem until we have to get up and exit down the middle aisle. Luckily we carried our own Bibles to and from the building. Guess what book covered my boner every week I left the church? The Bible. Equals D. The boys wore dress pants and button-ups. Girls wore skirts. I'm going to assume the blouses were implied. I've posted this in another thread but it's worthy. I didn't find out about this until my 18th birthday when my father told this story in front of my entire social life. When I was 15 and home alone I was watching P on the family television. I had the volume up rather loud and was vigorously pleasuring myself as only a 15-year-old can. My father came home, snuck through the house into the kitchen, grabbed his lunch and ate it in the backyard and left via the side gate. I was completely unaware of this. Not wanting to embarrass me in my delicate teen years, he waited until I was successfully through them and cut me down at knee height. I always denied that I smoke. Every time. After a 6-hour-long drive to my parents' house, during which I smoked a lot, my dad would greet me, hug me and tell me I smelled like roses. It was so much better than making me lie to him. I'm more worried about what they thought I was doing that I wasn't actually doing. My parents did this all the time. They found some evidence and would come up with a story on their own. For instance, one time I was doing a prop project for theater and had a bunch of empty cough syrup bottles in my room. We had to have a sit down talk about abusing medicine. I don't think there's many parents that would let a bunch of cough syrup bottles slide. Not quite on topic, but when I was younger, grade school age, my grandpa used to let me cheat like mad in Parcheesi. He'd just look away while I cleverly changed the dice. Also my brother and sisters and I used to regularly discover and steal his candy that we'd find in the drawers of his desk, which we weren't supposed to be looking in his home office, which we weren't supposed to be in. I smiled each time in the years after he passed away when it dawned on me that I wasn't fooling him in the least. I see a lot of comments about going into the bathroom with a laptop. Am I the only one that proudly marches into the bathroom in front of my parents with a laptop? I once did a 40 minutes Guild Wars mission on the toilet. Best poop of my life. I cut all the good pages out of my dad's penthouse, then asked my parents if they would please not look in my desk drawer, because I was going to keep their Christmas presents in there. When I was a youngster, trying to smoke some pot at the house was always dangerous. I never knew exactly when my mom would be home, so my best idea was to turn the shower on full heat, wait for the steam to build, then start smoking bowls underneath the exhaust fan. I thought it was super effective and I was super sneaky, and for 2 years, grade 10 and 11, my mom never mentioned anything, even though she had come home while I was showering many times. One day, I was preparing a session in the bathroom but I had yet to turn on the shower or fan, so when my mom came charging upstairs needing to use the bathroom she didn't think to knock. Needless to say, she started yelling at me, and in the midst of her screaming she says, "And I know you've been smoking in the bathroom for years, I juice." The daily arguments weren't worth it for her, and for that I will be forever grateful. Honestly, I'd probably be more pee about the high energy bill from all those unnecessary showers you weren't taking. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.